Next up, let's take care of updating items by toggling their packed status. So basically, that's the functionality that I showed you by the end of the previous lecture, right? So this is what we want to implement in our app now. And so to start, we actually need to create those checkboxes there. So right now we don't even have that checkbox. And so let's go here to our item. And before the span, let's now add an input of the type. And here we want a string. So of the type checkbox. So that's something. So we can actually already toggle this one here on and off now. But of course, it's not going to do anything. So basically, we want to also transform this element right here into a controlled element. And remember, a controlled element means that the element has the value defined by some state, and it also has an event handler which listens for the change and updates the state accordingly. So let's do those two things. And first, the value will be given by the item.checked status. And so this checked here is always a true or false value. And so that is exactly the type of value that we need to pass into the value of a checkbox. And actually here it should be packed and not checked, which maybe you had already noticed. But anyway, now let's keep going here. And so now next up, we need to add onChange handler. So we need to listen for the change event, which basically happens each time that we click here on the checkbox. Now here, for now, let's actually specify just an empty function. So a function that doesn't do anything. And here we're missing this. All right. And so the reason for that is that, of course, this function here that we are eventually going to specify here is going to change the packed value of the item state, right? And so that function will once again be placed where the state actually lives, so inside of app. And then we will pass it down using a prop, just like we did with onDeleteItem. So this is something similar. So instead of deleting an item, we will simply now update one item. And so again, that update happens each time that we click here on the checkbox. So let's now write that function here. So function, and again, starting with the handle keyword, and then toggle item. And that's because here we will only toggle the packed property. So not allow anyone to update the entire object, but only really to change the value of that packed property. So in order to know which object we actually need to change, we need to again pass in the ID. And so then let's again set the items, and then we need to pass in a new array, which just like before will depend on the current array. So we have our callback function here. And so now in order to update one of the objects in the array, we will simply loop over the entire items array using the map property, which will then in the end return a brand new array with the same length of the initial items array. But one of the objects will then of course have been updated. So in the iteration, each of the elements is called an item. And then here is what we're going to do. So whenever the item has the ID that is equal to the ID that we passed in, so which means that this is the object that we want to actually update, then we create a brand new object based on the current item, and then we set packed to the opposite of packed, so of item.packed. And that's it. And if else, so for all the other objects, we will simply return the current item. And just once again, I want to emphasize that I covered exactly that this is how we update an object in an array in great depth in the section where we review essential JavaScript for React. So please go there in case that this looks strange. But for everyone else, let's just keep going here. And now also add this function here into the packing list so that the packing list can then add it into the item. So we use once again the props basically as a communication channel here. So on toggle items, handle toggle item. So on toggle item right here. And now let's just copy this, add it here to the list of props, exactly like this. And then we pass it into the item itself. Let's do that here. All right, and finally we receive it here. So again, we need to use the packing list here as an intermediary step in order to reach the item itself. And so now here we can then replace this empty function with calling on toggle item with, just like before, the current ID, so that we actually know which is the object that we need to change. All right, and that's actually it, or at least it should be. So let's see if that works. So 1 socks, let's say 1 shirt and 1 charger. And now, as we click here, yeah, beautiful. So it updates our checkbox, and you see that it also updates here the strike through. So that's coming exactly here from when the item is packed. And the same, of course, works for all the other ones, because if we click on this one, then the item.id will be another one. And so therefore then this function here receives another value, which will then update another object. And deleting here, of course, also works. And so, yeah, we are done with building these two operations that we can perform on items. So toggling their packed status and deleting them. Now, before moving on, please just make sure to review the code that we wrote here. So just to make sure that you understand basically everything that's happening here, why we are doing it this way, and the way we then passed in these functions as props all the way down until the components that actually need them. So this is again child to parent communication, which is something that we're going to use all the time. And so make sure that you really understand this concept as well as lifting up state until you move on to the next lecture, which is going to be about derived state.